We will see what Barry Weiss is able to do at CBS News. You know, it was not that long ago that of the three major broadcast networks, I don't recommend you play this game. This kind of sordid business of trying just to rank the relative levels of depravity of the three broadcast networks, CBS, NBC, and ABC. But if you were to go down that road, I think you would have to conclude that CBS, at least until Barry Weiss's hire, was really the most egregious of the three. After all, it was CBS that edited in deeply tangentious, opportunistic fashion. They edited Kamala Harris's interview on the primetime Sunday evening 60-minute show to try to make it better for Kamala Harris, try to edit out some of those infamous cackling Kamala word salads. There are really few things that are more a perennial fixture of our political discourse than just how much the media is terrible. Seemingly day in and day out, we just fixate over precipitously declining trust in the media. It really seems that way, doesn't it? I mean, virtually every day, virtually every week, there is a brand new poll about just how much the media just absolutely corrosively stinks to high heaven, and that no one trusts them. This is now a long-standing trend. If you go back in the history of the reputable pollsters, the Gallup polling, the Pew polling on this subject, as recently, it's not that recent anymore, but as recently as the turn of the millennium, so think late Clinton administration into the 9/11 era, early Bush administration, that was around the time that in most aggregate polling, the media's net favorability went from being net positive to net negative. It went from above zero to below zero. And these days, as I said, the media is consistently competing with the courts, with the Congress, with sometimes the president, depending on who the president is, whether it's Joe Biden in the throes of his debilitating decline, but oftentimes with the Congress and various other institutions for just being the most unpopular imaginable. So I was struck by this recent headline, came across this over at Breitbart, but they're actually citing a brand new Gallup poll. So a new Gallup poll from just earlier this month. Americans' confidence in the mass media has edged down to a new low. 28%. 28%. Expressing a great deal or a fair amount of trust in newspapers. Just last year, in the calendar year 2024, this number was kind of close. It was still a little higher. It was 31%. 5 years ago, 40%. Okay, 40%. Not great. But that's roughly where an unpopular, politically unpopular president polls. Again, whether it's Joe Biden in the throes of 9+% inflation, or Barack Obama in the throes of the botched Obamacare rollout, various other presidents. I mean, it's not great, but that's within the realm of foreseeable possibility. 28%, however, is really, really, really bad. As I mentioned, it started to go below 50% around the turn of the millennium. You could actually go back even further. Really all the way back to the 1960s, 1970s, reports Gallup. Between 68 and 72% of Americans, give or take, express confidence in reporting. So we've just been going downhill very quickly, and it's been accelerating over the past few years. Now, the number one institution that is most to blame for the public's precipitous decline in trust in the media is, of course, the media itself. If you didn't have outlets, media organs like the New York Times, the Washington Post, NBC, CNN, that were just consistently carrying water for one political movement and one political party and doing everything they can to trash, to belittle, to humiliate, to demean, and to defeat the opposing political movement and opposing political party. If you had a media that saw itself as at least somewhat balanced, this really wouldn't be much of an issue. That is the sine qua non of precipitously declining bias. Now, the good news is that some media outlets are fighting a different fight. For instance, the show right here, the Josh Hammer Show, this is a product of Newsweek. I have been an employee at Newsweek for 5.5 years now. Hard to believe it's been that long. I am living proof of the fact that my employer, that Newsweek, values all sides. You hear my takes on a daily basis. I don't mince words. I call like I see it, and I see it in a pretty conservative fashion. I was the opinion editor at Newsweek. I ran the op-ed page for over 3 years. So whether it's that, whether it's this show, our mission statement at Newsweek is to platform all sides, to hear all perspectives. And Newsweek is not the only one either. Later in the show, we're going to bring on Leland Vittert, host of On Balance with Leland Vittert at News Nation, a pretty new cable news network, which is trying to take market share from, trying to rival CNN and MSNBC, MS Now, whatever we're calling it these days, because of the fact that those networks have gone so far down the left-wing rabbit hole. And there still is a market for people who care about objectivity, the facts, and the truth. So we'll hear about Leland Vittert's new book, Born Lucky, later on the show, but I've gotten to know Leland in a personal capacity and just watching his work because I really enjoy his program at News Nation, which you should go ahead and check out. Other outlets come to mind as well. A fascinating, absolutely fascinating recent development in this space is the hiring of a friend of mine, Bari Weiss, to be the editor-in-chief of CBS News. Bari Weiss, formerly, years ago, of the Wall Street Journal, then she left to become an editor and an opinion columnist at the New York Times. You might recall, in those dark early days of the summer of love of 2020, the summer of the death of St. George Floyd, our great martyr, and the ensuing chaos from Antifa and Black Lives Matter that followed. You might remember the whole story. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty details. Tom Cotton, senator of Arkansas, publishes this op-ed in the New York Times titled "Send in the Troops," calling for President Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807 to send in the National Guard to cities. Kind of quaint. That was such a big deal back then. You look at the year 2025, and President Trump has gotten a lot more comfortable talking about and actually acting upon the Insurrection Act, whether it comes to LA back in June or Memphis, Tennessee more recently there. And that's to Donald Trump's great credit. But back in 2020, the New York Times, they freak out. The whole staff walks out of the building. Literally. It was a day in early June. I remember it very, very well. And what happens in the aftermath of that? Well, the New York Times affixes this gargantuan, like 5 or 6, 7, whatever it was, paragraph-long editor's note. An editor's note song that might as well have been an op-ed in and of itself. Talk about how, this op-ed did not go through the proper vetting process. Baloney. And in the aftermath of that, among other consequences, Bari Weiss resigns from the New York Times, founds her own media company, which becomes the Free Press. Fast forward a few years, Larry Ellison, the billionaire founder of Oracle, his son, David Ellison, acquires Paramount, the parent company of CBS News, and David Ellison acquires the Free Press and names Bari Weiss, just a few weeks ago, as editor-in-chief of CBS News. So we will see what Bari Weiss is able to do at CBS News. You know, it was not that long ago that of the 3 major broadcast networks, I don't recommend you play this game, this kind of sordid business of trying just to rank the relative levels of depravity of the 3 broadcast networks, CBS, NBC, and ABC. But if you were to go down that road, I think you would have to conclude that CBS, at least until Bari Weiss's hire, was really the most egregious of the 3. After all, it was CBS that edited, in deeply tendentious, opportunistic fashion, they edited Kamala Harris's interview on the primetime Sunday evening 60-minute show to try to make it better for Kamala Harris, try to edit out some of those infamous cackling Kamala word salads. It was CBS as well that they had one of their morning hosts, Tony Dokapil, do a Maoist struggle session in real time. We discussed this on the show when it happened. They had Tony Dokapil do this real-time Maoist struggle session for the great sin of asking the race-hustling dimwit, Ta-Nehisi Coates, of asking him some challenging questions about his viciously anti-Western, anti-Semitic, anti-Israel book that came out last year, where he takes a cartoonishly left-wing view of the intersectional framing of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Tony Dokapil, who himself has relatives living in Israel, saw fit to ask a couple of challenging questions. And for that, CBS literally called in, if memory serves, some sort of DEI consultant. Either that or they had internal DEI people whoever it was, they forced Tony Dokapil to have an all-staff or all editorial staff apology next morning. So Bari Weiss has her work cut out for her over at CBS News. More generally speaking, my longstanding approach to the question of political bias, of institutional bias in the media, is simply to have an all-of-the-above approach. Where an opportunity exists for someone who represents the forces of civilizational sanity, and if you're a longtime listener or viewer of the show, you know that that is my preferred framing of our cold, roiling internal civil war here, not just the United States, but in Western civilization. We have this internal civil war between the forces of civilizational sanity. That is, we have the forces that want to maintain, withhold, preserve, and to bequeath, to pass on to the next generation our millennia-long Western Judeo-Christian biblical inheritance. You have the forces of civilizational sanity, and then you have the forces of civilizational arson. The summer of love, summer of 2020, Antifa, Black Lives Matter types, literal or proverbial arsonists who want to burn the whole thing down. So if you are team civilizational sanity, which I assume you are because you're watching this particular show, if you are team civilizational sanity, there are at least two things that you either personally can do or you should support others doing when it comes to the question of media bias. One, you should seek to have people work at and or to promote from within legacy existing institutions with vestigial, perhaps even decades-long credibility, institutions like Newsweek, my employer. You should try to have folks work there who will try to give, at a bare minimum, a more balanced perspective. Perhaps even you might overarching change the viewpoint of the publication. This could happen for someone like me, who again ran the op-ed section of Newsweek for 3 years. It could also happen at the level of ownership. My syndicated weekly opinion column, which goes up at Newsweek and a lot of other places, is, among other places, published by the Los Angeles Times, one of the nation's largest daily newspapers, and the nation's definitely the largest newspaper on the West Coast. They started publishing that opinion column earlier this year, back in late January, right after Trump took office again, because they realized they didn't have an authentic, hard-hitting conservative on their opinion page. They had Never Trumper Jonah Goldberg, or they have Matt Lewis, they have a libertarian economist, maybe one or two other idiosyncratic voices. They didn't have someone who was really of, by, and for the MAGA America First movement. So they reached out to me, and all this is due to the fact that the owner of the Los Angeles Times, a billionaire, is someone who is not of the woke mind virus, someone who is team civilizational sanity. Exact same thing happened, by the way, at the Washington Post. Jeff Bezos. Now, Jeff Bezos, your mileage may vary. He has some neoliberal character traits. He's something of a libertarian, laissez-faire fundamentalist. His economic ideology is not exactly in line with the more populist vantage point of J.D. Vance, Josh Hawley, and the more populist wing of MAGA. But their new opinionator at the Washington Post is someone who is team civilizational sanity, and they're starting to publish some very interesting op-eds at the Washington Post, something that, frankly, I didn't necessarily see coming as recently as a year ago. It's a very new development. So we're closely following a lot of these tabs here, as you can tell. The LA Times, Washington Post, Newsweek, News Nation, Leland Vittert's network, CBS News with the whole Barry Weiss experiment there. A lot of real-time experiments that are currently happening. So that's bucket one, is you make inroads within existing institutions. Bucket two, when it comes to trying to turn around the question of media bias, bucket number two is you form new institutions, or you start new shows. Or really these days, you give someone a camera and a microphone and you say, just let it rip, dude. Just let it rip on YouTube, Instagram, X, whatever your streaming channel is of choice. The Trump administration, to their great credit, understands that today's media landscape is defined not exclusively by legacy vestigial institutions, but very much by up-and-coming new media voices. In fact, the Trump White House and the Trump press corps, under the direction of Press Secretary Carolyn Levitt, among others, they have a whole separate credentialing process for new media voices. If you watch one of these Donald Trump or Carolyn Levitt press conferences, you will see that it's not just the New York Times, Washington Post, and so forth that have people there in the press galley. There are all sorts of just podcasters, YouTubers, Instagrammers, and so forth there. So yes, try to make inroads within existing institutions. That's me at Newsweek. That's the whole Barry Weiss experiment at CBS News. And yes, try to form new media institutions as well. There are so many possible ways to try to break down further the problem of media bias. I mean, I could basically take any issue imaginable and explain to you why the media is hopelessly, perhaps, dare I say at times, even irrevocably broken and biased when it comes to a certain question. But at least over the past month and a half, very challenging month and a half or so, there's one question and one issue that comes to mind is really just evincing the nature of the bias problem in media, at least as I see it. And that, of course, is the ever-vexing problem, the question of political violence in America. The blood was barely dry on my friend Charlie Kirk after he was assassinated at Utah Valley University on September 10th. And we had, it took a little while, it took longer than it should have, frankly, for local, state, and federal authorities to catch the assassin, but we got him. We did get him. It's a matter of show policy. We don't say the names of these freaks on the show, but it was pretty obvious pretty early on that this guy was a leftist. He was raised in a conservative Mormon household in central rural Utah, but he was indoctrinated by the university. He was a product of the modern academia ecosystem. He was someone who went down the rabbit hole of all the various nostrums and maladies of the neo-Marxist woke ideology. He was someone who was in a romantic relationship with his transgender roommate. He is someone who was a furry fetishist. He had a fetish for furries. And if you're thinking there, what the heck is a furry? Good for you. You don't traffic in those circles of the internet. Basically, people who have a certain knack for folks who dress up like animals. This guy was a total loon, a total left-wing loon. Even had the Italian Marxist song Bella Ciao, the lyrics on the bullets there. Nonetheless, how many do we see in the media at that time spring into action and say, "Oh my God, this guy is far right. He's a far right assassin taking out Charlie Kirk for what? For being too moderate? For being too pro-Israel? I mean, for the allegation, it never made sense on its face. Charlie did have a lot of critics on the right. People like Nick Fuentes and the Groypers, the neo-Nazis, that whole crowd. But we knew very, very early on that this assassin was a left-winger. That didn't stop Jimmy Kimmel from making an idiotic joke about it days after we knew the assassin's identity and his clear demonstrable motives. That, of course, got Jimmy Kimmel's show briefly yanked from late-night ABC by FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, or more accurately, by Brendan Carr's threats, which led to various companies deplatforming Kimmel from their ABC affiliates, Nexstar and so forth, Sinclair. But there were so many in the media that were doing this at the time as well. The media tries over and over and over again to make you think that political violence, at best, is an all-of-the-above problem. At worst, they would have you believe that it is a right-wing phenomenon because January 6th. January 6th. Last I checked, one person died as a result of January 6th. Ashley Babbitt. And Ashley Babbitt was not a Capitol Hill police officer. It is true that a Capitol Hill police officer died shortly after January 6th. It had nothing to do with January 6th. But Ashley Babbitt was one of the protesters. You know, as has been often noted, if January 6th was an insurrection, and if it was an insurrection filled with Trump supporters, MAGA supporters, probably the most disproportionately gun-owning group of folks in America, why were there no guns? If this was a pitchfork insurrection, if this was the storming of the Bastille, you know, in revolutionary France, if this was John Brown's rebellion, Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, or anything like that there, where are the weapons? So one person was killed and was Ashley Babbitt, a protester. Compare that to left-wing violence. Compare that to left-wing political violence in modern times. In 2012, a leftist MSNBC aficionado by the name of Floyd Lee Corkins drives in to Washington, D.C. to the headquarters of the Family Research Council, a socially conservative think tank, because he had heard that the Southern Poverty Law Center and MSNBC referred to them as quote-unquote anti-gay. And he went there with a gun with the aim of shooting up the Family Research Council and stuffing their dead faces with Chick-fil-A sandwiches. He was stopped by a security guard who he shot, thankfully non-fatally. That was 2012. In 2017, a shockingly similar story. James Hodgkinson, a Bernie bro, a dyed-in-the-wool socialist communist Bernie bro from the 2016 political cycle, drives in to suburban Virginia and shoots up half of the Republican congressional baseball team, grievously wounding Steve Scalise. Is a Bernie bro, a diehard MSNBC watcher. That was 2017. And on we go. 2022, Nicholas Roski, who recently just came out as transgender as part of this litigation. Nicholas Roski, once a man, now going apparently as a woman, flies from California to Maryland after the horrific, atrocious, and thus far unsolved leaking of the Dobbs abortion case at the U.S. Supreme Court. Flies from California to Maryland with a zip tie and burglary tools with the goal of trying to assassinate Brett Kavanaugh. Turns himself in at the last minute, and now apparently in court documents is identifying as a woman. Judge gave the dude a slap on the wrist, by the way. Disgraceful slap on the wrist. That was 2022. 2023, the Covington School shooting by a transgender fanatic in Nashville, Tennessee, a clear act of violent anti-Christian bigotry. Very similar thing happened, of course, earlier this year in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The Catholic school there in Minneapolis. The slaughter of the 2 Israeli embassy staffers in May in Washington, D.C. by a Free Palestine Marxist lunatic from Chicago. So too, the flamethrower, the Molotov cocktail from the Egyptian illegal alien in Boulder, Colorado, who so grievously burned a bunch of Jews there who were gathering for a free hostage vigil, that one of them actually burned to death subsequently. I believe it was a Holocaust survivor, burned to death because of those wounds. Horrific stuff. All the Tesla takedown acts of violence there. The violence against Donald Trump. The fact that Donald Trump barely survived by a millimeter from an assassin's bullet. In Butler, Pennsylvania, West Palm Beach, Florida. And of course, the assassination, most vividly, of my friend, our friend Charlie Kirk. Political violence, no matter what the media tells you, is not an all-of-the-above phenomenon. It is not a right-wing phenomenon. The polls bear this out. The percentage of left-wingers who say that political violence can potentially be justified, that speech really is violence, and the way to respond to speech is therefore with violence. The percentage is astounding. A Harvard poll I saw among Harvard students had that poll over 30%. Nuts. Sick. So there are all sorts of issues where I could say the media is biased on this. They're definitely biased when it comes to their euphemisms, to their language choice. When it comes to undocumented peoples, instead of illegal aliens, when it comes to talking about the unhoused population, instead of what normal human beings know as homeless people. Instead of referring to a transgender male as, a female, or vice versa. So there's so many biases to count, but to me, just the political violence conversation in the aftermath of the most recent, just truly high-profile, horrific act of political violence, the assassination of my friend Charlie Kirk, really just kind of underscores this particular malady. As I said, at Newsweek every day, we are doing what we can to fight back against this. That is one of the many purposes, certainly, of our show, The Josh Hammer Show, and is one of the many purposes as well of all that we do at Newsweek. As I did say earlier in the show, one of the other organs, one of the other media outlets that is very much dedicated to trying to hear all sides and try to attract that market share of those who actually crave the facts, crave the truth, don't want a biased perspective, is the upstart cable news network, News Nation. And we are just thrilled to bring on their host, Leland Vittert, the author of the brand new book, Born Lucky, to talk to us now about that book.
Well, with an intro like that, I'll come every week.
Well, we would not necessarily object to that. But Leland, the reason that we wanted to bring you on, you have this absolutely wonderful recent book that just came out about a month and a half ago, more or less. It's called Born Lucky. It's called Born Lucky, a dedicated father, a grateful son, and my journey with autism. So here's the book. Here's the book right here. Leland, the first thing that I have to say that I thought about when I got wind of the fact that this was a forthcoming release, I think I first heard about it, maybe over the spring or the summer, give or take, was I had no idea. I mean, I literally just had no idea that you had autism. And, autism is something that I've been thinking about with increased frequency, given the fact that my wife and I just had our first baby last year. We've had the whole vaccine conversation. My sister-in-law here in Florida where I live actually works with autistic children. That's her full-time job. So I was just deeply delighted to dive into this book here. So I don't want to take more of your thunder. Why don't you just kind of dive in and start us from the beginning? You found out at a fairly early age that you had autism, and just kind of give us some of the key milestones in your early childhood. How did you become aware of it? How do you start to overcome it? And especially, of course, your relationship with your beloved father, Mark.
Oh, Josh, thank you so much. The Born Lucky story has sort of exploded. We're now number 4 on the New York Times bestseller list, not because of me, but because of what this is showing to every parent of a kid who is having a hard time, that there is hope and that there is so much they can do. My parents didn't tell anybody about my diagnosis. They didn't tell me until I was in my mid-20s, and obviously I didn't ever speak about it beyond just my family until recently when we started working on this book. And the reason goes back to when I was diagnosed. So I was about 5 years old, and my parents were told that I needed to be evaluated. So you're a new dad. You can imagine how that would feel to hear as a new father. And they took me to one of those medical testing centers. They're nervous, understandably. And you've got the linoleum floors and the stale coffee and the magazines in the waiting room, whatever. They give me to the woman to go test me. And she comes back after about 2 hours with me and she says, look, it's very difficult to understand what's going on inside Lucky's head. Lucky was my childhood nickname. She said, there's a few issues here. There's real behavioral issues. If I would be touched by a kid in a lunch line or something like that, I'd turn around and slug the kid. So I had no understanding of how to interact socially with anyone my own age in any way. Going to birthday parties or anything like that was just not an option. I was never invited to anything like that. Then there was the sensory issues, which were pretty significant. Classic autism signs of, anything with socks or different kinds of shoes, what kind of clothes I wore, anything else, that would cause meltdown after meltdown. And there were severe learning disabilities. So a 20-point spread between the two halves of your IQ test represents a learning disability. I had a 70-point spread. It was the biggest spread they'd ever seen. And the woman said to my parents, we don't really understand what's going on with him, but you're going to kind of have to meet him where he is at. And my dad said, as any father would, heartbroken, well, what can we do? And she said, not much. And he goes, is there anything we can do? And she says, well, generally not. So that's how hopeless and helpless my parents felt at that moment. My dad spent the next 15 years being my only friend, adapting me to the world rather than the world to me. And we wrote Born Lucky to try and give parents who are having a hard time with their kid, doesn't matter what the situation is, and whose kid is having a hard time, try to give them the hope and the feeling of agency and power that my parents didn't when I was 5.
So I think that's why I was so keen to pick up this book, Leland, is again, because I have a 10-month-old daughter, and these are very much things. I mean, I'm a first-time father. This is our first child. These are very much things that I'm thinking about here. Why don't you give us some of your favorite memories, your favorite childhood memories of the way that your father, Mark, helped acculturate you to the world around you, helped accustom you to things like what you just explained, to being on the lunch line there and someone cutting you off there. I mean, how did you learn to respond in conversation at the right time, to interact with people on the lunch line there? What were some of the foremost memories that you have of your father kind of guiding you through really just how to be a young kind of functional member of society, I guess?
Yeah, Josh, there's a lot there in Born Lucky of sort of the childhood memories. But, a few things my dad realized. One, I wouldn't have any friends. So he said, maybe I thought I could be your friend. So he became my best friend. Number two, he realized that I wasn't going to get self-esteem or feel good about myself from either doing well in school because of learning disabilities. I wasn't going to have friends my own age. I wasn't going to be popular, and I wasn't going to be good in athletics, the three currencies of childhood. So he had to find ways to give me that sense of self-esteem and sense of self-worth outside of those three things. So it started by doing push-ups. I did 200 push-ups a day, 5 days a week. His idea was that self-esteem is earned, it is not given. And that's very different than how parents are told to raise their kids now, right? Everybody is wonderful and everybody can be president and everybody can be a pro athlete and on and on and on. That was not how I was raised. Number three, he had to try and teach me how to interact in the world as the world interacted, right? Because my understanding of social cues and emotional connection and everything else was completely off. So he would take me to lunch with one of his friends, right? And I was a talkative little kid. I didn't talk till I was 3, but then after that, I wouldn't shut up. So he would, and I would badger old folks into trying to find anything and everything about them, especially if they were involved in anything I was interested in. So, if we were going to lunch with you, Josh, and I would have loved it, especially Mr. Hammer, because everybody was Mr. and Mrs. to me, that we could have talked about current events and on. And I would have started as soon as we sat down about, well, how do you book your podcast and how do you write your books and what do you think is important in history right now? And what do you think of the current deal with Israel? Blah, 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 blah. It would be nonstop. And at some point, Dad would tap his watch. And that was my signal to stop talking, although he didn't say anything publicly, so it wasn't like I was being scolded. And then also my signal to sort of bookmark that, right? So later, as we were driving home or that afternoon, he'd say, okay, so when Mr. Hammer was talking about his new daughter, why did you interrupt and ask about the Hamas-Israel deal? Well, I don't know, Dad. I thought it was interesting. Okay, well, what could you have asked about his daughter that Mr. Hammer would have wanted to talk about? So it was that very granular teaching of the social and emotional construct and fabric that comes so naturally to so many that he had to teach me from day one.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. So we're chatting again, folks, with Leland Vittert. He's the author of the new book, Born Lucky. You can follow him on X at Leland Vittert, host of On Balance with Leland Vittert on News Nation. Leland, as you start to get older into your teenage years, obviously you're an incredibly perfectly functional adult. Again, I literally had no idea. I look at you, I talk to you right now, and I feel like I still have no idea. I would have not have any idea were it not for this book. Was there a certain age that you felt, or perhaps more accurately, that your father felt that, I don't want to say you had overcome autism, because that's probably overstating a little bit, but talk to us about that transition from being keenly aware of the various ways in which you were different, for lack of a better word, that transition into becoming a full-fledged functional member of young adulthood, etc.
Well, I think my wife may take issue with the fact that I've become a full-fledged member of adulthood. Yeah. But, Josh, this is a learned skill for me, right? Sitting here, talking to you, staring at the camera, all of those things I have to think about in that sense. And I write in Born Lucky that this is not a prescription. This is not a cure. This is not how to cure your kid of autism or fix a kid or anything else. This is how my dad adapted me to the world. And I still work on it every day, right? Just a couple of months ago, I was at my father-in-law's golf club. And we just finished a round of golf with a nice older man, had a lovely chat, and I was late, so I was trying to pack my golf bag. And I'm out there by where the golf carts are, and I'm trying to shove the bag into the travel bag and get ready to go. One of the very classic characteristics of autism is becoming task-focused, right? You become obsessed with one task.
Right.
So I'm trying to pack the golf bag, and this guy who we had played golf with comes up to me to try to talk to me. And I was just phenomenally rude to him, right? Because I was focused on packing the golf bag, pack the golf bag, pack the golf bag, pack the golf bag. And he eventually just walked away. And during the time, I realized how rude I was being, but I couldn't help myself. I couldn't stop. And in that moment, I felt to myself, God, Lucky, just 40 years later, you still sometimes are right back at being 5 years old, which is totally true. I found his phone number. I sent him a text message. I said, I'm so sorry I was so rude to you. I feel terrible. I didn't say, oh, by the way, I have autism. And my dad never wanted me to use a diagnosis, that's why he never told me about it, as an excuse or a reason not to act in a certain way. And I think that's one of the things that was really important to him, was that I would behave the way I was supposed to behave no matter what, or as well as I could behave. So was there a time that I kind of switched? Yeah, probably. I think out of high school, once sort of the really intense bullying of high school and isolation of high school stopped, through college a little bit. And then as I got older and sort of practiced more, by the time I was 25 or 30, probably 25, I was starting to make friends. So in Born Lucky, kind of see, most guys make their first friends when they're 5, 6, 7 years old. I was making my first friends when I was 25, 26, 27 years old. But it took me that long to understand social interaction, human equation.
Fair enough. And, it's funny. I mean, I listened to you tell these stories about, grabbing a phone number and sending a text message to apologize for being rude or curt. And I think to myself, I mean, I literally do that. I mean, that's eminently relatable behavior. I mean, these are kind of things that in many ways just make us human in the first place, right? But I want to go back, Leland, to your childhood for a second there, because, again, I mentioned this numerous times, but to me, as a matter of self-interest, I'm just constantly thinking about raising my daughter. And I just think a lot about your incredible admiration for your father, about the incredible way that your father went above and beyond to work with you, and not to belittle you, to treat you as a mature young child and as a mature young adult, but to try to take the maturity and then guide you directly, concretely in the right direction. So I think I kind of know the answer to this question, at least to an extent, but I'm going to ask it anyway. There is, what kind of advice would you have to young first-time parents like me, young first-time parents across America? You mentioned the importance of earning self-esteem. I think that's a really, really important attribute for sure. Anything else come to mind?
Look, this is a parenting book written by a kid. So I don't think I'm qualified to offer parenting advice to anyone. The most important part of the book, I think, is the last 4 pages, which is my father's afterword, which to me really says perhaps what you're looking for. What I've been astounded by and so humbled by is how many people I've heard from after writing Born Lucky. The book came out September 30th, and we're on the New York Times bestseller list. We've sold out 3 or 4 times on Amazon. We're trying to get more books in. We've printed about 40,000 more books. You know what this is like as an author. The reason for that is because this is speaking to parents and showing them how much power and how much agency and how much hope there is. To me, the important thing to do is to listen, and to listen to what parents are getting from the book. And what they're getting from the book is that idea of hope, that they can make such a difference by showing up, and that there is a hope that things are changing. I think you see in Born Lucky how desperate my father is, right? Every day for years, I would come home from school a puddle or a wreck, and my mom would say, we would have to put you back together again. And I would go upstairs. I'm thinking particularly about one day I come home from art class at school, just humiliated. Been in art class. The teacher didn't think I was Picasso. Says in front of the entire class in 8th grade, Vittert, if my dog was as ugly as you, I'd shave its ass and make it walk backwards in front of the whole class. So I come home, I'm my usual complete emotional wreck. And my dad just sort of took that weight off of me. I mean, I would yell at him, I would cry, I would be upset, I would do all of these things. And I didn't know until we started writing Born Lucky that he would then leave my room most nights. This was an everyday occurrence for 5 days a week for years. And he would go downstairs after I had gone to sleep, sit in the living room by himself. It's dark, 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. My mom's asleep. And he would sit in the living room by himself and cry. And he never told me. And in fact, as we started working on Born Lucky, he didn't tell me. I had to get it from my mom. So all I can do is sort of show my dad's and my relationship, and people can take from that whatever they will. And I just hope it gives people the hope that there's so much they can do.
Amazing stuff. So again, folks, we're chatting with Leland Vittert. Follow him on X at Leland Vittert. He's the author of the recent best-selling book, Born Lucky, A Dedicated Father, A Grateful Son, and My Journey with Autism. You can hear that it's just selling off the charts, 40,000 new copies. My friend, that is a lot of copies. Trust me, as a recent first-time author myself, I know that all too well. So tremendous congratulations on writing a best-selling work of nonfiction here in the year 2025. Not an easy thing to do, by the way, in the current literary environment, from one author to another, as you know. Before I let you go, Leland, I guess we probably should dive into contemporary public policy at least a little bit. It's okay. It's a bit of a fraught topic and a bit of a third rail conversation there. You know, one of the things that strikes me about the whole autism debate, if you really want to go there, the whole vaccine debate, and I'm not particularly hardcore on the vaccine issue, to be totally honest with you. My wife's a little more hardcore than me. I'm somewhat of a moderate. You might even call me a squish, actually, on the issue. But one of the things that strikes me so much is that when you have folks who feel really strongly about trying to draw a link between vaccines and autism, or recently there was the Tylenol during pregnancy and autism there, they oftentimes make reference to the proportion of diagnosed autistic people in America. Mm-hmm. And to me, the most obvious thing is that what's likely happening here, and I'd love your take on this, is that practitioners have simply expanded the universe of people who meet the definition of autism. That to me seems much likelier than drawing a direct kind of causal link between A and B. I'm kind of just curious, as someone who just wrote a whole book on this, for your take on all of this there, and maybe also the whole recent Tylenol debate as well, if you have any thoughts on that.
Sure. I'm not a doctor and I'm not a scientist. I have the chemistry grades and biology grades to prove that, if anybody's interested. So I don't know any of this. What I do know is that it was 1 in 1,500 kids who were diagnosed with autism when I was a kid. Now 1 in 31, triple that for boys, still higher in poor and minority communities. Yes, the fact that you view it as a spectrum rather than basically, what was a much more narrow diagnosis when I was a kid, that is significant. Number one, I think that does not, at least everything I have been able to understand, and by talking and interviewing Jay Bhattacharya, Marty McCary, other sort of top health figures, can conclusively say, and even the people who are anti-RFK cannot conclusively say, that simply the new definition and increased awareness explains this explosion in cases. To me, the explosion in cases of autism should be the scientific question of our time, because of what it does to families and what it does to kids. You're a new parent. I guarantee you, if you could have checked a box when your wife was pregnant, my child will have autism or not, you would check no. So would everybody else. So I recently watched a clip of, I think it was Chris Hayes from MSNBC, sort of berating and belittling RFK and saying he's obsessed with finding a cause of autism. Why shouldn't we be obsessed with finding the answer to this question? Right. So I am thrilled that there is now meaningful research into this. And more importantly, as I think Jay Bhattacharya laid out when I had him on the show about this, that we're no longer looking at this with sacred cows, right? And that we're able to, and scientists are now free to ask these questions without having to say, we're going to search for the cause of autism, but we can't say it's vaccines. Now we're going to say we're going to search for the cause of autism and let the science being the pursuit of truth rather than truth, take us where it needs to go.
No, very well said. I'm pretty sure I agree with every single word that you just said. So we are in full concurrence there. And Leland Vittert, once again, folks, is the host of On Balance with Leland Vittert on News Nation, a rapidly up-and-coming cable news station. Please do go ahead and check it out. Follow Leland on X at Leland Vittert. And again, his best-selling new book is called Born Lucky. Leland, congratulations one more time on the remarkable success of this book. You have an inspiring story. Thank you so much for sharing with us, and come back soon, my friend.
Josh, good to be here. Thank you.